Good morning, afternoon, evening. My name is Toni Appelberg-Parks, your happy coder clinical documentation outpatient CDI guru. Um, and I thank you for making the time to be here with me today for this session on understanding the origins of CDI, clinical documentation integrity. I work with physician groups on Medicare risk adjustment and clinical documentation as staff and also as a consultant through Appelberg Help for Docs. And today I'd like to spend 20 minutes or so on CDI, clinical documentation integrity, and just talk about where it came from, why it exists, and where we stand with this in 2026. Mid-year. It is now mid-year 2026. So maybe you've wondered why coders and CDI specialists seems like probably constantly asking you to be more specific in your notes, or why a query might land in your inbox asking you to clarify a diagnosis. So in this talk, I'd just like to kind of help give you the why behind that and cover what CDI actually is, how it's used today, and how these documentation standards have evolved. The historical arc of CDI as a discipline and the major milestones that kind of got us to where we are now. And also we need to look at what's new this year with AI and outpatient CDI. So we have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to go ahead and get started. But first, before we dive in, I have to do the quick disclaimer. And I'll let you read that on your own. Okay, so over our 20 or so minutes together, let's start with a clear definition of CDI and why it matters, and how it shows up in day-to-day practice right now in your patient care, coding compliance, and in your decision making. And let's also step back and look at how documentation standards have evolved over the decades. We've gone from paper charts to EMRs to AI-assisted tools. And so we also need to kind of look at the historical perspective of CDI as a discipline and how its purpose has broadened over time. You're hearing about this thing called CDI more and more as the years move on, right? So we'll look at the key milestones that shape that, from the DRGs in our inpatient CDI, which used to be the only thing there was in the 1980s, through what's happening now in 2026, where we have risk adjustment CDI or outpatient CDI in our managed care systems. So, and then we'll finish it with a look at what's genuinely new this year. AI, things like AI-driven review and the expansion of CDI into outpatient settings. And hopefully before we're finished, you'll have the context you need for why documentation matters as much as it does. So let's start with what is CDI, clinical documentation integrity. At its core, CDI is the ongoing process of making sure that the health record accurately, completely, and specifically reflects a patient's true clinical status. So this happens both at the moment of care and across the continuum of that patient's treatment. So it's easy to think of documentation as the paperwork that we do after the clinical work is done, but actually CDI reframes it as part of the clinical work itself. It's the bridge between what's actually happening or happened in the exam room and the coded data, how it translates into coded data that gets used downstream for not only reimbursement, but also quality reporting and population health analytics. So why does that matter? Well, let me give you 3 reasons. The first is that quality patient care, or the complete clinical picture in the chart, helps every clinician who touches that patient make better decisions. And secondly, accurate coding and reimbursement is another reason. Documentation is what drives the correct DRG or HCC capture, and it affects how the practice or the hospital gets paid. And finally, operational efficiency. Strong documentation up front means fewer denials, fewer physician queries, and less rework for everyone downstream, and that includes you. So to be a little more concrete, CDI shows up in 4 places in your day-to-day practice. First, in the patient care, when documentation is thorough, every clinician who reads that chart gets a clear and complete picture of the patient's health status. And this supports better treatment decisions, especially in care transitions. Secondly, coding and billing is accurate. Specific documentation supports the precise code assignment, and this drives appropriate reimbursement. Vague documentation, even when the clinical picture is clear in your head, often can't be coded to reflect the true acuity of the patient. And regulatory compliance. So well-supported records are what let a practice withstand an audit. If documentation doesn't support the codes that are billed, there's a real financial and compliance risk. And then there's clinical decision making. The comprehensive records help care teams coordinate, and this is especially so when multiple specialists or facilities are involved in a patient's care. So these 4 things reinforce each other. Better documentation isn't just a compliance box to check, it's the foundation of how well the whole system functions. Documentation itself has gone through a real evolution. Again, we started with paper charts, handwritten notes, simple charts, everything siloed in a single physical location, right? If a specialist across town needed your notes, someone had to fax or mail them. The next big shift we had was the move to EHRs, electronic health records. EHR adoption made the records far more efficient and accessible. And then suddenly information could follow the patient instead of staying locked in a filing cabinet in your office. So from there, the emphasis shifted to interoperability. These are standards that emphasize accuracy, completeness, and the ability for systems to actually exchange data with each other, not just store it. And now in 2026, we are in the era of AI-assisted documentation. Natural language processing and AI scribes are supporting real-time concurrent CDI. They are flagging gaps as the note is being written rather than weeks later. So we're going to talk more about what that looks like in practice for those that are not already doing that towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so from here, let's zoom out and look at CDI as a discipline because its purpose has really shifted over time in essentially 3 broad phases. Phase 1 was financial reimbursement. When CDI first emerged, the focus was narrow. It was to make sure documentation supported appropriate payment. And that's honestly where a lot of physician skepticism about CDI comes from. It started to feel like it was only about the bill. And then phase 2 broadened that focus to quality and compliance. As regulatory scrutiny increased, CDI became just as much about demonstrating the quality of care and standing up to audits as it was about payments. And then phase 3, where we are now, is integrated practice. CDI today is woven into daily clinical workflows. It supports both financial and clinical objectives at the same time. And it's not a back office function anymore. It's a partner to the clinical team. So understanding this arc matters because it explains why CDI programs today ask about things that go way beyond billing. Things like specificity for quality measures and risk adjustment. So not just the DRG assignments. A few milestones that map out of that journey concretely. In the 1980s, DRGs, diagnosis related groups, were introduced, and they were linking hospital reimbursement directly to the complexity of the patient care for the first time. So that was really the birth of modern CDI. In 2015, ICD-10 implementation brought a huge jump in coding specificity. And this really raised the bar for how detailed documentation needed to be to support the codes being billed. And through the 2020s, value-based care models tied reimbursement more closely to outcomes. And this pushed documentation completeness even further. So it's no longer just about what was done, but how well the patient's overall risk and outcomes are captured. In 2024, we saw refinement of the CMS-HCC risk adjustment model, and this increased the importance of precisely capturing chronic conditions. This is core to the risk adjustment work that many of us do. And so that brings us here to 2026, where AI-assisted tools and expanding outpatient CDI oversight define the current landscape. So that's the heart of where I practice and the heart of where I want to spend our last few minutes together. So let's look at what's actually new in 2026. There are a couple forces reshaping CDI programs: AI, artificial intelligence, and outpatient expansion. So on the AI side, organizations are using AI-driven CDI tools for concurrent record review and are reporting somewhere in the range of 20 to 30% faster review cycles. So it's definitely making a difference. The technology flags potential gaps in real time instead of specialists finding them after the fact. Mature CDI programs overall are seeing something like 25 to 30% reduction in claim denials. So again, a big difference. This is a meaningful financial impact, but it's really a byproduct of documentation that was accurate and complete from the start. And the third shift is outpatient. As more services move out of the inpatient setting, CDI oversight is following them. It's no longer just a hospital floor function. So here's the key point that I want to leave with you. NLP, natural language processing, can flag a documentation gap, but it can't replace clinical judgment. What AI is really doing is freeing up CDI specialists to spend their time on the physician queries that matter the most. So the relationship between CDI and physicians is shifting more from record review toward more of a genuine clinical partnership. And that's pretty good news for all of us. That means there are fewer generic queries, and the ones that you receive should be more meaningful. But I just want to note that the 20 to 30% and 25 to 30% figures that I mentioned are reflecting the industry reporting as of 2026. And it's not based on any practice's own audited results. So just for illustration purposes. Okay, so with that, just to wrap it up, CDI started as a financial function and grew into a compliance function, and today it's fully integrated into how good clinical care gets delivered and communicated. The technology will keep changing. AI tools, outpatient expansion, whatever comes next. But the underlying goal, that hasn't changed. The chart should tell the true story of the patient, right? That's always the ultimate goal. So I want to thank you again for your time today. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have in the comments, or you can reach out to me at Help for Docs. If anything should come up later, you can always reach out to me there. But I do my best to follow the comments and respond to those as well. Take care.